Hey guys, welcome to today's journey back in time, where we'll be experiencing what it was like to survive the hard life of a medieval peasant. We will put you in the shoes of a medieval peasant if they had any, but don't worry, we'll keep it fun and light. If you enjoy the ride and the stories we tell, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. And also let us know where you're tuning in from because, hey, we might not be in medieval times, but we can still make history together. Imagine this. It's the year 1298, the era that coincided with the medieval warm period. The time in history lasting from 900 AD to mid-1300s AD, when the temperatures in the northern hemisphere were far warmer than ever before or after that age. If you were born during this period, it meant your ancestors must have done something to anger the gods, and the gods were taking it out on you. Anyway, you're in a small village somewhere in medieval Europe during the peak of summer in 1298. The sun's not even fully up yet in the morning, but it's already trying to turn your life into a sauna. No breeze, no air conditioning, no iced latte with oat milk to cool you off. Just heat. And not the nice, comforting kind, but that thick, sticky air that clings to you like a bad relationship. You feel it everywhere, under your arms, behind your knees, like the humidity has unpacked its bags and decided to live with you forever. And you're a peasant. Congratulations, you're living the dream, just not the dream you were hoping for. No golden riches, no cushy office job, no ability to hit snooze on your problems. Instead, you're stuck in this village, doing back-breaking labour every day. But hey, at least you're alive. That's something, right? Survival is the name of the game, and the odds, not in your favour. Heat stroke, exhaustion and sore muscles are just part of the fun. You wake up before dawn, but not because you're a go-getter. Nope, the real reason you're up so early is your neighbour's rooster, screaming in your face like it's an alarm clock on steroids. It's a little before 5 a.m, and you're not sure if that crowing is announcing the new day or summoning a medieval exorcism. Either way, you're awake now. Your bed is a joke. Calling it a mattress would be a compliment. It's more like a pile of hay, dirt and twigs with the occasional rat if you're lucky. It's not plush memory foam, but at least it doesn't eat your dreams. It just eats your sleep. You roll out of it, feeling sticky and uncomfortable, already sweating from the heat that's been hanging around since midnight. And now, let's talk clothes. You've got 2 shirts, one for work, which is mostly sweat-stained, and one for best, which is only worn at funerals because, let's face it, you want to look semi-decent when you're burying someone. Today, it's the work shirt. No choice. It's that or walk around naked and no one needs to see that. You shuffle to the door and it's like walking through a swamp. The floor is dirt. Muddy, sticky, daily used dirt that makes you feel like you never really left the muck. You push the door open and bam! The full force of summer smacks you in the face. The air is still, thick and heavy, like the world itself has hit pause and decided it's done. The sun is barely up, but everything is already turning into an oven, including your soul. Stepping outside, it's like walking into an endless desert. The fields? Cracked, dry, and completely unwelcoming. The barley's wilting, the earth is unforgiving, and the air smells like it's been stewing in the sun for days. You inhale, and all you get is dust, dung, and a very strong human musk that reminds you of how far civilization has run away from you. The pigs are awake, grumbling about their lack of breakfast. The other peasants are stirring, preparing to face the day's misery. But there's no room for complaints, right? You're a peasant. Complaining is for the rich folks in their stone houses or the monks in their cool stone cloisters. You live in a one-room cottage that you share with your wife and kids and 1 or 2 chickens. You've got work to do, barley to harvest, hay to gather, and a landlord who expects those crops to be delivered by the end of the week, or else. No pressure. You take another step and the sun's already climbing higher, casting a fiery glow over the fields. Sweat is pouring down your face. Your clothes are sticking to you like a second skin, and the heat feels suffocating. The ground beneath you is cracked and dry. You've barely started your day, and already you feel like you're being roasted alive. But hey, there's no time for a pity party. This is your life now, and it's one long, sweaty blur of work. There's no escape from it, no relief in sight. The heat's not going anywhere, and neither is the work. You'll keep walking, keep working, keep pushing yourself, because that's what peasants do. They endure. They survive. From dawn till dusk, it's just barley to cut, water to haul, and praying for a breeze that's never going to show up. So, congratulations. Your day has started. You've made it out of bed, which in your case is more of a hay and twigs pile than a comfortable mattress. You've also survived the rooster's pre-dawn scream, which frankly sounds like it's preparing you for the medieval apocalypse. Your cottage? Not exactly the 4 seasons. It's more like a sauna with rat problem. As you walk back inside your cottage after personally greeting the sun outside, you can already feel that familiar sticky sensation of sweat clinging to your body. The air is thick, like you've been wrapped in a woolen blanket that someone forgot to wash. The smell inside is a delicate mix of damp straw, sweat, and whatever animal musk the chickens left behind. Oh, and the heat? It's like the world's largest hairdryer aimed straight at your face. Welcome to the daily grind, peasant. You shuffle over to the fireplace, your feet sticking to the mud-caked floor. The floor feels like it's been designed specifically to make you question your life choices. Every step makes a sticky noise, echoing throughout your tiny cottage as you shuffle to breakfast. The breakfast of the champions. Today, like most days, it's pottage, a glorious concoction of barley, turnips, whatever leftover vegetables you found in the garden, and of course, desperation. If you're lucky, there might even be a few dried peas floating around to keep things interesting. Maybe, but don't get your hopes up. If you're looking for bacon, eggs, or fish, you've got the wrong century and wrong family for being born into. Bacon, eggs, and fish are as rare in your diet as a black sheep in a flock of crows. What you've got instead is a bowl of something the colour of muddy river water, with a texture that can only be described as grit with a hint of regret. You scoop up a spoonful, and it sloshes in the bowl like it's given up on life, just like you have. But you eat it anyway. Why? Because survival is a thing, and apparently pottage is the fuel you need to make it through another long, sweaty day in the fields. It's not the best meal, but it's what you've got, so you shovel it in. As you chew, you entertain the idea of finding a surprise, maybe a stray potato or an accidental piece of meat. But spoiler alert, none of that happens. Instead, it's just more barley and turnips. You're eating for calories. You'll need every single one. Ah, the joy of medieval life. And now, let's wash it down. You don't have fresh water? Of course not. That would be too easy. Instead, you reach for your mug of ale. Not a fancy craft beer, mind you, but flat, lukewarm and slightly sour liquid bread. Yes, your breakfast beverage of choice is basically liquid dough. A swig of this delightful concoction coats your mouth in that unmistakable taste of it's not going to kill you. Probably. At least it's better than the village well water, which could probably be classified as a toxic waste dump. No one's rushing to drink that. Everyone at home is drinking the ale. Your kids are drinking it too, especially the kids. You've just accepted this as your reality. This is the medieval version of a healthy breakfast. Sure, it's not refreshing, and sure, it's a little bit gross, but hey, it's a far cry from drinking the swamp water. You choke down another spoonful of pottage and another gulp of ale. The chickens are watching you, probably wondering why their eggs aren't being turned into an actual meal. They give you the side eye like they know they've got it bad too. They're trapped in their little coop, trying to lay eggs for people like you to eat, but they'll be lucky if anyone ever decides to season their eggs with some salt or pepper, if they ever get any at all. As you sit there, contemplating your sad, sad breakfast, you realise that it's actually not the worst thing you've had this week. It's pottage, it's mush, it's edible. Barely. You've made peace with it. Like that one friend who always brings a soggy dish to the potluck. You don't love it, but you know it's the only option. You'll survive. There's no butter, no sugar, no salt, and certainly no spice. Spices? Those are for the rich or the special feast days, which happen about 3 times a year, and only if you're lucky. If you're lucky enough to get an egg, you'll have to go through the ritual of asking the local priest to bless it. Because why not? Nothing says living the dream like a blessed egg. But you can't waste time dwelling on the injustices of medieval food. After all, you've got a full day ahead, and the last thing you want is to sit around feeling sorry for yourself. The pottage is done, the ale is gone. Now it's time to face the fields. There's barley to harvest, hay to gather, and a lord waiting for his crops. You've survived another medieval breakfast, and that's the most you can ask for in 1298. Time to get back to your daily grind of sweat, dirt, and praying for a cool breeze that never comes. You stand up, wipe the last bits of barley mush from your mouth, and head for the door. Sure, your stomach's growling in protest, but there's no time to care. The fields are waiting, the sun is rising higher, and you've got work to do. Maybe, just maybe, you'll get lucky and find a fresh egg in the field today, or at least a few more peas in tomorrow's pottage. But that's a tomorrow problem. Today, it's about survival, one miserable bite at a time. By 6 a.m, you're already out there in the fields looking like a medieval superhero, but only if your superpower is sweating like a faucet while trying not to pass out from the heat. The sun's barely lifting itself out of bed. Yet here you are, up and grinding. The air is thick with that all-too-familiar heaviness. You grab your scythe. Honestly, calling it a scythe is a bit generous. It's more like a curved piece of metal that's been slowly losing its will to live for the past 20 years. But hey, it's your trusty tool and you've made peace with it. You take a swing and the barley gives you the kind of look that says, yeah, I'd rather not be here either. Some stalks stand tall, defiantly trying to look strong, while others slump as if saying please, no more. It's the barley's version of holding on to the last shred of dignity before accepting its fate. Your first few swings have the grace of someone who has done this 1,000 times. So much grace, in fact, that it is almost painful. Swing, chop, swing, chop. You're starting to get into the rhythm, if rhythm means moving like a slow-motion zombie in a sauna. The barley falls to the ground, not with a satisfying crunch, but more like a tired sigh. You get a brief sense of accomplishment before the sun shines even harder, as if it's trying to see how much misery one person can handle before their soul exits the building. But it's not the barley you're really fighting. It's the relentless heat that turns you into a personal sauna with legs. The sun's up, and the temperature's rising faster than your hopes for an early retirement. You try to wipe the sweat off your brow, but it's like you're just helping it relocate to other parts of your body. Your shirt sticks to you like a second skin, and you quickly realise you've entered an unspoken competition for the world's stickiest tunic. The sweat, combined with the dirt, makes you feel like you're part of the landscape now. Just another rock that the sun will eventually roast into submission. The field stretches out before you like an endless sea of golden misery. You look around and there's no real teamwork going on. Sure, people are working, but they're not in it for the camaraderie. They're in it because there's no other choice. No one's here for fun. No one's here for a chat. The ground beneath your feet is like a cracked, dried-up sponge, and the air smells like a mixture of dust, sweat, and something that might be considered human if you squint hard enough. By this time, you've moved from fighting the barley to just trying to stay upright. Your back's aching from bending down over and over again, and every time you straighten up, it's as if your body is reminding you that it's really more out of shape than ready for action. But there's no time for whining. You've got a sickle, a field full of barley, and a lord who expects his harvest whether you're alive, dead, or somewhere in between. So, you keep swinging. As the sun climbs higher, it feels like the world is slowly turning into a furnace. The air is heavy and sticky, almost as if the universe is trying to send you a message that hot is an understatement. You take another swing, and the sweat is no longer just an inconvenience. It's a constant companion, running in rivulets down your face, your neck, your back. Each drop of sweat reminds you of your place in the grand scheme of things. You're a cog in a machine, and that machine has a lot of barley to harvest. The sound of the sickle cutting through the barley is barely noticeable now. The only noise that matters is the deafening roar of the heat that's practically begging you to call it quits. But you don't. The sun isn't your friend. It never has been. Surely not smack in the middle of the medieval warm period. But you can't change it, and honestly you're too tired to argue. At some point you pause for a moment, looking at the field that's still only half done. You think about how this might be your life forever. Cutting barley, hauling water, breaking your back under a sun that never stops. It's not glamorous. It's not even remotely easy, but it's the life you've got. And so, you keep doing it, no matter how much your body protests. But hey, at least there's a small consolation. Your sickle is doing its job. You've made progress. The barley's falling, albeit at a snail's pace, but it's happening, and that's something. After all, progress is all about celebrating the little victories. A cut here, a cut there. You're one swing closer to the end of the field. The heat keeps rising. The sweat keeps dripping. But you keep moving. By the time the sun reaches its peak, you're too tired to even notice. All that matters is the next swing, the next cut, the next step toward getting this day done and dusted. By now, the sun has fully committed to its role as the world's most relentless alarm clock. You've been hacking away at the barley for what feels like hours, but the field seems to stretch endlessly before you. The barley's been chopped down, some even lying in neat little piles at your feet, but you're only getting started. There's still an entire field to get through. Great. You've found a rhythm now, though. The swing of your sickle has stopped feeling like a workout and more like a weird form of exercise designed specifically to torture you. By this point, the heat is so thick, you might as well be wearing it. Your tunic clings to your back like it's a second skin. Sweat drips down in rivers, forming sticky little puddles between your ribs and at the small of your back. You tell yourself that this is just part of the charm, and to some extent it is. After all, this is what it's like to work the land in 1298. No fan, no cold water, just you and the ever-present sun. The work continues. It's one endless row of barley after another, and you can't help but feel a little bit like a hamster on a wheel. except the wheel is a field of barley and your hamster-sized task is to cut it all down before your body completely shuts down. The sickle swings again, the barley falls. The sickle swings again and the sweat drips. And you keep going, even though every fibre of your being is screaming for a break. But breaks are for the weak. Besides, if you stop now, you might just be accused of witchcraft. No one has time for that. A dog barks in the distance, but it's not an excited bark. It's the kind of bark that says, I'm done, I'm tired, and if I don't nap soon, I'm going to make life difficult for everyone. The dogs have it figured out. At least they get to nap. You, on the other hand, have barley to chop. You think you're nearly done, but then you realise you've only covered half the field. Your muscles, still sore from the previous swings, are starting to protest. But you don't stop. No, you push through, because that's what peasants do. They work, they endure. The sound of the sickle cutting through the barley becomes almost comforting, a reminder that you're making progress. That said, you start to lose track of time. Is it noon yet? Is it 2 p.m? It doesn't matter. The sun doesn't care what time it is. It's just going to keep beating down on you, making sure you stay in the zone of discomfort. And then, for a moment, the sun seems to take a break. The heat lessens for a second, and you swear you feel a tiny breeze on your face. It's not much, but it's enough to make you feel like maybe, just maybe, you'll survive this day. Of course it's short-lived. The breeze disappears as quickly as it came, but for that brief moment you felt like you could breathe again. You laughed to yourself, if only for a second. Life doesn't give you many of those moments. You glance up, checking your progress. You're nearly done. The barley's falling, the sweat's still pouring, but the finish line is in sight. The sun may be cranked up to full blast, but you're pushing through. The field looks almost neat now, and you get that feeling of accomplishment. Or at least you'll get it once you're done. But for now, you've still got work to do. And then, as if to remind you that the day's not over, a rooster crows in the distance. It's not a victory cry. It's a reminder that you've got hours to go before this day ends. The heat may not relent, but neither will you. You finish up the last row, feeling a sense of pride and, let's be real, a little bit of relief. It's a long day, but you're one step closer to being done. And with the sun still blazing above, you take a moment to appreciate the small victory. You've survived another few hours. You can almost taste the reward, except there's still more work to do. But for now, the end of the field is in sight, and you, the sweaty, tired peasant, have made it through. By noon, the village has entered what can only be described as a furnace mode. But a little relief is fast approaching that makes all the hard, crazy work a little worth it. The midday break. The sun is at its peak, burning down on everything in sight like it's holding a grudge against the world. The once bustling fields are now a slow-motion struggle, where people move like furniture being dragged across the floor, getting nowhere fast. You've reached the midpoint of your workday, and now it's all about survival. Forget productivity. It's not about getting ahead anymore. It's about finding shade wherever you can and praying to the ancient gods of midday laziness. You know, the ones that gave birth to the universally accepted truth. If you can't beat the sun, take a nap in the shade. The village has officially checked out. The streets are eerily quiet. Even the dog, who usually holds some deep personal vendetta against every cat and squirrel in the village, has collapsed in the shade like a tired heap of fur. The only movement you see is the occasional fly lazily hovering, probably wondering why it's even bothering. You, however, are on a mission. An unspoken quest to find the perfect patch of shade that will make you feel like a person again. But as you trudge back to the village, every step feels like you're moving through molasses. the dirt path sticks to your feet. Your tunic feels like it weighs 50 pounds, and sweat is streaming down your back like it's auditioning for a river roll. You make your way to a shadowed corner where the occasional breeze whispers to you like a faint promise of relief. You drop down, your body making contact with the earth like a sad sack of flour. The ground is hard, but it's still better than standing under the sun, pretending like you have any energy left. It's the midday break, and suddenly everything seems to slow down. The only sounds are the occasional grunt from the pigs, who are now belly up in the mud like they've forgotten what standing even means. The chickens are more interested in napping than clucking. Even the horses have abandoned their dignity, lying flat out with their legs in the air. Everyone's just done. You, on the other hand, are sitting in your corner, enjoying the shade and occasional breeze like you've won $1 million. Your body, which had been swinging the sickle like a machine, is now protesting every inch of movement. You don't care. You've survived this long. What's 5 more minutes of suffering? 5 more minutes of just breathing. It's that weird semi-conscious phase where your brain goes into autopilot and your body's just happy to not be moving. You're not asleep, but you're not exactly awake either. You're just there, in a heat-induced haze. It's kind of beautiful in a way. Everyone here, from the old man under the tree to the dogs rolling in the dirt, is on the same page. Everyone's exhausted, but we're all in this together. The sound of a cow mooing breaks the silence, a reminder that despite everything, life goes on. You're still here, and so is everyone else. Everyone's just hanging on, one uncomfortable moment at a time. The cows, like you, are hot, tired, and ready for a nap. The goats are lying flat on their stomachs like they've given up on even pretending to be dignified. In a way, it's peaceful. This is what life is. Work, rest, repeat. The rhythm of survival, where you do your best to get through the day without burning to a crisp under the sun. You glance at the sun, which is still blazing, mocking you, but you don't care anymore. In this moment of shade and the occasional hint of a breeze, you feel like you've won up to the sun. Eventually the sun will dip a little lower, and you'll be back at it, cutting barley with your sickle. But for now, in the heat, in the exhaustion, you've got this brief, precious moment of nothing. It's not much, but it's all you need. Now that your medieval peasant avatar is on a midday break, let us also take a break and talk about some summer-enduring tactics these medieval European peasants adopted to counter the effects of the beautiful summer. When it came to surviving the hot medieval summer, you didn't just have to sweat it out and hope for the best. No, you had to get creative. Very creative. In fact, medieval peasants had developed a whole arsenal of tactics for dealing with the oppressive summer heat. Some of these were clever, others were just downright bizarre, but all of them were, well, necessary. Let's take a look at how the peasants of the 14th century, with no air conditioning, no fans, and certainly no iced lattes, survived the hottest days of the year. Spoiler alert, it's not pretty, but it's pretty entertaining. Let's talk about clothing, because let's face it, that is a real medieval mystery. You'd think in the blazing heat of summer, people would strip down to the bare minimum. I mean, who wouldn't want to lose a few layers when it feels like the air itself is a sauna? But no. In the medieval world, it was all about layers. You'd think these people were trying to set a world record for most clothes worn at once. But no. Long, loose wool was the way to go. Wool, as it turns out, is pretty amazing at regulating temperature. It keeps you cool when it's hot and warm when it's cold, so it's like your body's personal thermostat. Kind of. Except it also traps the smell of sweat, dust, and whatever farm animal you've been near for the last few weeks. So yes, you're not going to be winning any freshest smelling awards, but at least you're not dying of heat stroke. Underneath the wool layers, linen undergarments. That's right, linen. Now, linen is supposed to be good at wicking away sweat, which is a plus. But here's the thing, you're wearing one shirt day in, day out. No changing for a fresh set of clothes. If it's linen, it's sticking to you. After a week of this, you probably start to look less like a peasant and more like a human-sized sponge, except you're a lot less absorbent than you'd like. And to top it off, you had wide-brimmed straw hats. These weren't just for fashion, though, let's face it, they were kind of chic in a I'm not even trying, but still winning sort of way. These hats had a multifunctional purpose. Not only did they protect you from the sun, but in the winter, they doubled as soup bowls. No joke. You could literally wear your hat, fill it with soup, and slurp it down. Now that's what I call practical fashion. It's like medieval multitasking. Look at me. I'm keeping the sun off my face and eating lunch at the same time. Now let's talk about water storage. Water in medieval Europe? It was not precious, it was questionable. Let's just say the village well wasn't exactly a pristine source of hydration. You couldn't just pop into the nearest 7-Eleven and grab a bottle of water. Oh no, you had to make do with what you had, which, in this case, was usually a porous clay jug. The beauty of these jugs? Well, they would sweat through evaporation, which meant the water would cool down slightly. The problem? Well, let's just say, if you've ever drunk water out of a container that's been sitting in a field for hours, you'll understand that slightly cool doesn't really cut it when you're already sweating like a pig. The water probably had a unique flavour. Let's call it village earthiness, with a subtle hint of dust, bacteria, and whatever critter wandered by earlier. Yummy. But that wasn't all. Some villages, particularly the lucky ones with a spring, would fight over it. Yes, actual, full-blown, I'll push you into the water if you get too close kinds of fights. That spring? It was like the medieval version of winning the lottery. If you had access to spring water, you were basically a royal, except, without the castle's gold and good hygiene. So what did they do with the spring water? You guessed it, they drank it. With a sprinkle of herbal infusions like elderflower or meadowsweet, you could cool the blood. No one really knew what that meant medically, but it sounded pretty fancy, didn't it? Cool the blood. What a mystical phrase. It almost makes you wish you could try it, even if you'd end up smelling like a medieval flower shop by the end of it. Speaking of herbs, let's take a moment to talk about wise women. Now these women were basically the medieval version of your grandmother who always had a cure-all in her pantry. They knew which plants could help you survive the heat, which ones would make a sore throat go away, and, importantly, which plants could help you when your body felt like it was slowly being roasted on a spit. Herbal remedies were everything. In fact, the village-wise woman was your go-to for anything from sunstroke to a headache, to even a really bad case of I've been out in the fields for 10 hours and I might be imagining a fox chasing me fever. These women didn't just hand you a few sprigs of lavender and tell you to keep calm. Oh no, they brewed up tinctures, poultices, and all sorts of remedies, often with combinations of vinegar, nettles, and regret. If you weren't careful, you'd end up with a bottle of something that smelled worse than the village well water. But hey, it was effective, we assume. But here's the kicker. If a goat happened to die unexpectedly, just, suddenly drop dead, the village would probably get very, very nervous. Why? Because those same wise women who'd been trusted for their herbal expertise were suddenly suspected of witchcraft. It's true. One goat dies, and boom, suddenly you're stirring suspiciously brewed potions in the back of your hut, and everyone thinks you're a witch. Why? because nothing says witchcraft quite like a dead goat and a few questionable herbs. Now, if you had the bad luck of being a wise woman and someone's chicken mysteriously vanished, well, you could find yourself in front of the local priest, defending your use of garlic and thyme. If you couldn't convince the community that you didn't turn into a crow and fly off with the chickens, which frankly might have been an interesting claim to make, you were at risk of being accused of witchcraft. But let's not focus on the negatives. What's important is that these women were incredibly skilled, whether or not their practices were perceived as a little too magical for comfort. A good poultice could save a life, or at least make you feel a lot better about spending the next few hours out in the sun. Now, let's talk about the ultimate luxury during a medieval summer: shade. If you had access to a tree that offered a decent amount of shade, congratulations. You just hit the medieval jackpot. Shade wasn't just something nice to have, it was a survival tool. You had to time your breaks to perfection, so you could make the most of the brief moments of coolness. And if you weren't near a tree, well, you had to improvise. It's hard to overstate how important shade was, so it's a good thing medieval people were nothing if not creative when it came to seeking it out. You didn't just sit under trees, you practically worshipped the tree's ability to cool you down. You'd lean against its bark, close your eyes, and hope that somehow, just somehow, the heat would ease up a bit. But if there weren't any trees around, you had to settle for whatever shelter you could find. Maybe a crumbling stone wall, maybe a dilapidated cart that's been left behind for exactly this purpose. And if you weren't fortunate enough to have any shade at all, well, you could always just squint at the sky and hope for cloud cover. But cloud cover in medieval times? Well, let's just say it was like waiting for the last slice of bread to be eaten at a feast. It wasn't going to happen. Of course, there's another key part of surviving the heat: your home. Now, medieval peasant cottages weren't exactly built with cooling in mind. In fact, they were designed to trap heat, much like a pizza oven. If you think of a peasant house as a glorified sweat lodge with better roof thatch, you're on the right track. These houses were typically made from wattle and daub, which sounds charming, but really it's just mud, sticks and cow dung smooshed together to form a structure. It's about as insulating as a blanket made from wet cardboard. And the roofs? Oh, those were thatched. The kind of thatched roof that's not great at letting heat escape, especially on a 100-degree day. So, when the heat of summer hits, your cottage quickly becomes a thatch and sweat festival. The walls and roofs would hold heat like your uncle's joke collection, uncomfortably for hours and hours. Your solution? Open the door, open a window, hope for the best. But let's be honest, this was medieval times, so your window was probably about as big as a crack in the wall, and that door you have probably doesn't even close all the way. So, good luck with that. So what did medieval peasants do to avoid getting scorched like a piece of bacon in a pan? The answer is simple. They didn't really have a solution. They had no sunscreen, but that doesn't mean they didn't try their best. Some peasants rubbed their skin with animal fat. Yes, animal fat. Which, let's face it, probably did absolutely nothing to prevent sunburn, but at least it kept your skin moisturised. If by moisturised you mean greasy and smelling like a barn. It also had the added benefit of acting as a bug repellent. Bonus! Also, did I mention it made you smell terrific? I did, but I wanted to rub it in. No pun intended. Some peasants might have been lucky enough to use herbal remedies to soothe the burn after it happened. They probably applied cooling lotions made from herbs, like aloe vera, if it existed, who knows, or whatever else they could find. What they didn't have was SPF 50, so the outcome was usually a lot of peeling, redness, and, well, a hefty dose of regret. Alright, let's talk about fruit. Or rather, the medieval peasants' version of fruit, which was less refreshing and more barely edible. Watermelons? Not a chance. The only thing close to a watermelon in medieval Europe was a cucumber. You might think of it as the cucumber. That could have been a watermelon if only it had a better PR team. These babies were around 95% water and served as the medieval equivalent of a drink. Sure, it wasn't like biting into a cold, juicy slice of watermelon, more like gnawing on a garden hose. But when you've been out in the fields baking like a pie, even a cucumber can feel like a miracle from the gods. Then there's squash. Yes, squash. Another miracle food that did absolutely nothing to cool you down but made you feel slightly better about life. It had enough water content to prevent you from actually turning into a human-sized raisin. But don't get your hopes up. It didn't exactly quench your thirst. But if you could manage to get your hands on a melon, you were basically royalty. It was like being handed the keys to the kingdom, even if that melon was slightly shriveled and about to turn into mush. Still, any relief in this heat was worthy of a celebratory feast. And by feast, I mean you get to eat it with everyone else, while pretending it's the best thing you've had in weeks. Still, these fruits were seasonal. If you were lucky enough to have a good harvest, then you'd eat your fruit like royalty, at least until the next season rolled around and your village had to survive on, well, turnips and the occasional dried carrot. So, when summer heat hit, it wasn't about indulging in watermelon by the lake. It was about biting into cucumbers like your life depended on it. Spoiler alert, it did. Let's talk about animals, because let's face it, when you think cooling down in summer, the first thing that comes to mind is definitely not goats, chickens, or pigs. But here we are, in the thick of it. Livestock, those charming and sweaty companions, were your only relief in the medieval summer. Pigs, goats, cows, and chickens. They all became your sweaty farmyard roommates in the sauna that was your medieval peasant cottage. No air conditioning? No problem. You've got a whole menagerie of animals to keep the temperature high and the smell even higher. The most helpful animal in your heat-induced survival plan? The cow, of course. Cows were basically the original air conditioners. Their bodies, heavy with milk and warmth, turned the barn into a nice steamy oven that was perfect for a sweat lodge session. While they didn't directly cool you off, they did serve as a reminder that things could always get worse, which was comforting in a twisted way. At least you thought. You weren't the only one sweating buckets. And then there were the chickens. Ah, the chickens. Not helpful in the heat, but certainly loud enough to make you feel like you're never alone. They were the background noise to your misery, clucking away as you slaved away in the fields. If there was a silver lining to their relentless squawking, it was that they distracted you from the oppressive heat. Unless you were trying to sleep, in which case they acted as nature's alarm clock, reminding you that life could always be more irritating. But the true comedic chaos came from the pigs. These glorious creatures were all about wallowing in mud to keep cool, which meant they spent most of their summer looking like hot messes, completely drenched, caked in filth, and still somehow managing to be the most comfortable of all the animals. Meanwhile, you were stuck sweating away in the heat, trying to focus on not passing out from sunstroke while the pigs had their very own spa day. Lucky pigs. And let's not forget the goats. Goats, always mischievous, were busy escaping from their enclosures and making a run for it. While you struggled with the heat, the goats were out there, living their best life by climbing onto rooftops, or chewing on whatever random bits of vegetation they could find. Nothing says summer survival like a goat making a mockery of your entire existence while you sweat through your linen shirt. At least the goats weren't concerned with the heat. They were too busy being as stubborn and ridiculous as possible. In short, while these animals didn't cool you down, they certainly provided some unintended entertainment. They may have been just as miserable in the heat as you, but they at least had the decency to make their suffering a little less boring. After all, when you're trudging through 100-degree heat with no shade and a serious case of swamp ass, You need some ridiculousness to keep your spirits up. Thank goodness for farm animals. The hope for a breeze was a joke. Sure, there might be a gust every now and then, but it would never be enough to cool you down completely. You could sit under a tree for hours, squinting up at the sky, praying for just the tiniest wind, and still only get a passing whisper of coolness that never quite touches you. The real breeze, it was a lie. You'd spend your time waiting for a wind that never arrives, and by the time it does, you're already sunburned, sweaty, and exhausted. Just accept it. This is summer. And now that your time to rest is over, we're back to your medieval sun-filled life as a peasant. As the sun starts to dip, you think there's a glimmer of hope. Just a few more hours of work and then the evening is here, you think. A moment of peace, finally. But in the medieval world, hope is like the last few drops of water in a nearly empty jug, fleeting and fragile. The evening isn't a reprieve, it's just a continuation of the sweat-soaked struggle. You trudge back to your cottage, a walking collection of dirt, sweat, and that mysterious sticky substance that somehow found its way onto your skin. The barley fields are less oppressive now, but only because the sun is fading. Still, the heat lingers, refusing to leave. When you reach your cottage, it's a relief. Well, kind of. Your home feels more like a clay oven. You step inside and the heat slaps you in the face, trapping every ounce of sunlight that your hut absorbed all day. It's a medieval sweat lodge. You thought stepping inside would cool you off, but instead you've entered a personal hell of trapped heat. The thatched roof, quaint in its appearance, has worked over time, storing every bit of the day's sunlight. You're not just a person now, you're a piece of bread in an oversized oven. You step in, and the heat clings to you like an unwelcome relative. The straw mattress in the corner is your only solace. You eye it with dread. It's your only option, but it's the last place you want to collapse. The air is thick and sticky. You drop the barley bundle to the floor and feel your body protest. Sweat pours from places you didn't even know could sweat. Your clothes cling to you, desperately trying to stay attached. You try to peel off your shirt, but it feels like it's part of you now, stuck and unwilling to cooperate. Dinner time, more pottage. It's the same thing you've been eating since forever, mystery vegetables and stale barley. Tonight, though, you spot a small consolation. Leeks. Not great, but it's something, and maybe a sliver of salted fish, which has been brined so long it could probably pass for a weapon. But you eat it. What else can you do? There's no restaurant to run to for a quick meal. Just when you start to convince yourself that this is fine, that you've embraced the charm of medieval cuisine, you hear it. The unmistakable sound of your youngest child throwing up in the corner. Maybe the pottage was too much for them. Maybe it's heat exhaustion. Or maybe it's just the despair of facing another night of the same awful meal. Whatever the cause, there's a mess to deal with that no one wants to touch. You return to your pottage, swallowing each spoonful out of pure resignation. It's no longer about hunger, it's about survival. The pot will stay full and tomorrow you'll eat it again. Maybe with a different mystery ingredient, maybe not. But it's all you've got. Dinner is less a meal and more a group survival exercise. Your family glances at each other, too tired to speak. There's a quiet understanding. We're in this together. You look at your pottage, imagining a better meal. A roasted chicken with potatoes and gravy, maybe some lemonade. But then the reality hits. No lemonade, no roast chicken, just more pottage. The evening continues, sticky and quiet, punctuated only by the hum of flies. The rooster, never one to miss a beat, lets out a crow, reminding everyone that the cycle never stops. You sink into the straw mattress, which has somehow become one with your body. It's not comfortable, but it's all you have. Your body aches in places you didn't even know could hurt. Blisters from the fields, sunburns on your neck, sore knees. You glance at the window, but there's no relief. The moon is cold and distant, offering no comfort. As you lie there, you hear a faint rustle. Maybe it's a fox, or the wind, or your neighbour arguing with her husband about whether to leave the door open. There's no peace in medieval Europe, not when every noise feels like an invitation to chaos. You finally close your eyes, hoping for the sweet release of sleep, but sleep doesn't come easily. After a long day of back-breaking labour, drenched in sweat and eating your 17th bowl of pottage, you might think that when night falls, you'll finally collapse into a deep, peaceful sleep. But if you've been living as a medieval peasant for any length of time, you've learned that sleep is not the tranquil reprieve you hope for. No, sleep is a battleground, and your foes are fleas, lee, and a straw mattress that feels more like an attack on your body than a place to rest. Your mattress is a sad excuse for comfort, just a heap of straw that pokes and prods every inch of your body. It's not like you've got a memory foam mattress waiting for you. The smell is a delightful mix of sweat, unwashed linen, and the pervasive staleness of a damp, poorly ventilated cottage. The heat hasn't let up either. As you pull the thin blanket over yourself, it feels like you're wrapping up in cling film. Sweat sticks to your skin, and as you lay there, the bugs, those uninvited guests, start their feast. And then, of course, to make matters even worse, the noises start. You hear your neighbour snoring so loudly that you'd swear it could break windows. Their snoring is more like a pig being chased than any human sound. You try to drown it out, but all you're left with is the constant rustling of your own skin as the bugs continue their midnight parade. The warmth in the room is stifling, the air thick and hot like a brick pressing against your chest. Eventually exhaustion gets the best of you, and you drift off into a fitful sleep, one that's more of a haze than anything resembling rest. You find yourself dreaming of soft pillows and fresh meadows, things you'll never see in your life. You wish for a moment of comfort, but the heat, the bites, and the discomfort are too much to ignore. Still, sleep eventually comes, though not in any form you'd consider restful. It's just enough to get you through to the morning. But just as you start to think you might be able to sleep through the night, you hear a rustling. It's not just the floor creaking. Something is moving in the room, and it's not supposed to be. You open your eyes and listen closely. The sound of scratching gets louder, followed by the unmistakable sound of something rummaging through your food stores. It's the fox, or maybe it's a raccoon. Whatever it is, it's after your chickens and you have to stop it. You groan, dragging yourself out of bed, already feeling the bugs and sweat cling to your body. You've barely slept, and now you have to chase away an intruder. You fumble with the door, careful not to wake anyone else in your family. It's just another night in your life. You can't let a fox steal your food, even if it means another hour without sleep. You stagger into the night, shooing the fox away from the chicken coop. By the time you return to your bed, the sleep you've been desperately seeking has already slipped away. The room is still stifling, and the bugs are still biting. Your body aches, your mind is exhausted, and sleep seems like a distant memory. But exhaustion eventually catches up with you again. You lie there, barely drifting in and out of sleep, but it's enough to get you through until morning. The rooster's crow echoes in distance throughout the night. The heat hasn't let up. The bugs are still there, and the sweat keeps flowing. But you doze off, and just like the rooster's early crow, signals the start of another monotonous day in the life of a medieval peasant. You drag yourself out of your uncomfortable straw bed just like the previous day, which sticks to you like a bad memory exactly like the previous day, with only 2 shirts, one for daily use and one for special occasions. You throw on the everyday one and prepare for another long day. Breakfast is stale bread, often shared with weevils, and you chew through it with resignation just like always. Your thoughts wander, but you quickly push them aside, knowing that if you stop, you'll never get going. The day unfolds predictably. Harvest the barley, sweat under the sun, and eat more pottage. Life is repetitive. By evening you return to your equally uncomfortable bed, sticking to the same old routine. No surprises, no luxuries, just survival. The cycle of work, discomfort, and basic sustenance repeats daily, offering little more than the predictability of life. And yet there's comfort in this predictability. Despite the heat, the sweat, and the exhaustion, the routine is your anchor. Each day may seem the same, but it's enough to get you through, because in the end, survival is what matters most. Well, congratulations! You've just survived the medieval peasant experience, complete with fleas, bad bread, and unbearable heat that would make even the sun take a break. You've been on the struggle bus for an entire day. No Wi-Fi, no air conditioning, no pillow-top mattresses, just sweat, straw, and maybe a weevil or two for extra crunch. But don't worry. We're not about to leave you hanging in the dust of the Middle Ages. Oh no, we've got a modern twist for you. Now that you've been through the medieval trenches, it's time to bring things into perspective. Let's take a moment to compare your hardships. Let's face it, a 20-minute wait for an Uber is practically torture, with the absolute breathtaking daily grind of medieval peasants. I mean, I don't want to be too dramatic, but modern problems like slow Wi-Fi are basically the equivalent of a medieval peasant deciding whether to roast or boil their goat. Spoiler alert, the peasant had it worse. Much worse. The next time you complain that your coffee's too cold, or that your favourite show keeps buffering, let me remind you, the peasants had no coffee. Or a favourite show for that matter. Their reality TV was watching their crops grow, and that's about as exciting as it got. The only thing they had to binge watch was the sweat dripping down their face as they harvested barley under a blazing sun. And don't even get me started on the Wi-Fi. We complain when it drops for a second, but back then, they had zero internet, and their connection to the outside world was a local rooster yelling at them to get up at 4:45 a.m. That's it. No social media, no memes to share, no cute dog videos to watch while avoiding your responsibilities. Their form of entertainment? Getting fleas. Yeah, that's right. And that wasn't even considered high-class entertainment, mind you. That was the daily grind. Let's talk about the basics, the real things we take for granted today, like for example toilets. Yeah, the peasants didn't have plumbing. They had to handle their business outside, which, on a hot summer day, is basically the medieval equivalent of a public service announcement for why you should never leave your house during a heat wave. But today, you can sit on your soft, comfy throne, aka a toilet with seat warmers, and scroll through social media while doing your business. How's that for luxury? Speaking of luxury, let's chat about air conditioning. Back then, air conditioning was essentially a dream, something peasants didn't even know existed. So they did what any normal person would do in that kind of heat, suffer in silence while sweating through every shirt they owned. Meanwhile, you've got cool, climate-controlled offices, automated fans and air-conditioned cars. In fact, you're probably complaining that it's too cold in your office right now, and the peasants would be rolling in their sweaty, flea-infested graves. But wait, there's more. Do you ever wonder how much you're sweating when you walk from your front door to your car? Well, that's cute. The peasants didn't even have cars. They had to walk miles just to get anywhere. Imagine needing to haul a bucket of barley to your lord's manor, all while thinking, A nice stroll through the fields of misery sounds great. They didn't even have a paved road. If they were lucky, they had muddy paths that might turn into a mini river if it rained. Meanwhile, you just jump into your air-conditioned car, and if you're feeling fancy, you might even use your heated seats. But here's the thing. Despite all of this, the medieval peasant didn't just survive, they thrived. Okay, fine, they didn't really thrive by modern standards, but they kept going. And that's pretty impressive, right? I mean, they had to be resilient. The peasants' survival skills were top-notch, making do with what they had in the most creative ways. Like, if they didn't have enough food, they didn't whine about it. They got creative with things like pottage, which, let's face it, probably wasn't too different from everything else they ate. A little barley here, a little turnip there, and a splash of "please let me survive." They didn't have fancy health supplements or organic quinoa. They had turnips and weevils. If you want to talk about resilience, let's give a shout out to the medieval peasant spirit. They didn't have any comforts, but they had community. They had to band together to survive. And I'll tell you this much, they were probably way better at group projects than we are today. I mean, can you imagine working 12 hours a day in the fields while also looking after the goats, the chickens and the village gossip? That's a team effort. And you know what? They probably had way better camaraderie than you do when you try to split a bill at brunch. So let's celebrate our modern comforts, but let's also remember the resilience of those medieval peasants. And next time your Wi-Fi goes down, or you're stuck in traffic and you start losing it, take a moment to appreciate the hot shower you'll have when you get home, or the Netflix series you can start binge watching. Because trust me, you're not sitting in a mud hut, fighting off fleas while wearing the same shirt for 3 weeks. And if you ever find yourself complaining about your long commute or your pizza being late, just think. At least you're not walking miles with a pig, or chasing down a rogue chicken in the heat, or, trying to sleep in a thatched roof hut with a family, a goat, and an ever-growing collection of insects. Oppressive life. While you may think the picture we have painted of their daily life is an exaggeration, the truth is that the medieval peasants lived under constant hardship, enduring physical toil and oppressive systems that affected nearly every aspect of their lives. Far from the humour you may find in assuming the role of a medieval peasant for a day, feudalism, economic exploitation, and social oppression created a brutal existence that left little room for personal agency or comfort for them. From grueling labour to taxes and religious control, medieval peasants were trapped in a cycle of survival with little hope for escape. Let's take a look at the systematic oppression they faced in their everyday life, the feudal system and labour. At the core of medieval peasant life was the feudal system, which structured society into rigid hierarchies. Landowners, including lords and nobles, controlled the land, and peasants worked that land in exchange for a place to live and a small portion of the crops. Serfs in particular were bound to the land and could not leave without their lord's permission, effectively making them the property of the landowners. While technically not slaves, serfs had little autonomy. The labour was relentless. Peasants spent the majority of their days in the fields, cultivating crops like barley, wheat and oats. The work was back-breaking and often required long hours under the sun with little rest. Harvesting could stretch for weeks, depending on the weather and the crops, and any failure in the harvest meant not only hunger, but also severe punishment. The workload often exceeded what was reasonable, as peasants had to work their lord's land several days a week, in addition to working their own plots. They were also required to give a portion of their crops, livestock or labour to their lord, which often left them with little more than subsistence. In years of bad weather or crop failure, many peasants faced near starvation. The burden of taxes and economic exploitation. Moreover, the peasants were burdened with multiple forms of taxation. The king, the local lord and the church all imposed taxes on peasants. The crown, in need of funds for wars or royal projects, would levy taxes on the peasants, often demanding a percentage of their crops or a monetary tribute. The church too extracted its share, with a mandatory tithe of 1/10 of a peasant's produce. This tax was collected in kind, which meant peasants often had to part with a significant portion of their already meagre harvest to satisfy the church's demands. In addition to these taxes, peasants had to pay for services provided by the local lord or the church, such as using the mill or the local oven. These fees were often unfairly high, ensuring that peasants remained dependent on their lords for the most basic necessities of life. The system left peasants with little opportunity to save or invest in their future. Any extra produce or income was consumed by taxes and fees, and with little hope of improvement, most peasants lived in chronic poverty. The church and social control. The Catholic Church played no less a significant role in the oppression of peasants, both spiritually and economically. The Church controlled much of medieval life, including the land. It owned vast estates and received tithes from the peasants, in addition to its spiritual authority over them. The Church often upheld the feudal system, teaching that social hierarchy was part of God's plan, and reinforcing the idea that peasants should accept their subjugated position. Religious teachings emphasized that suffering in this life would be rewarded in the afterlife, which helped justify the extreme inequality. Peasants were told that their humble status was a virtue, and that working the land for their lord was their God-given duty. This belief helped prevent peasant uprisings and quelled any discontent with the oppressive social system. The church also wielded significant power in peasants' daily lives. It regulated marriages, baptisms and other rites of passage, which left peasants with little control over these important life events. Furthermore, the church often demanded labour and material contributions, such as building churches or maintaining the clergy's property, on top of the already overwhelming burdens peasants faced. Famine and disease. And then there were famine and disease, that were persistent threats to medieval peasants. Crops could fail due to weather conditions, disease or pestilence, leading to famine. Even in good years, the harvests were rarely enough to provide peasants with much more than bare subsistence. During times of drought or floods, when the harvest was particularly poor, peasants often starved. In these times, peasants had little recourse, as the lord's land did not provide enough to compensate for their losses. Famine was often compounded by disease. Poor living conditions, lack of sanitation, and overcrowding made peasants highly susceptible to illness. In 1347, the Black Death swept through Europe, killing an estimated 1/3 of the population. Peasants, living in unsanitary conditions with close proximity to animals, were particularly vulnerable to this devastating disease. When disease struck, peasants had little access to medical care, and their chances of survival were slim. Even when they recovered, the physical toll left many debilitated for the rest of their lives. Legal and social oppression. To top it all, the medieval peasants had few legal rights. They were governed by the whims of the lord, and any form of dissent could lead to harsh punishment. Serfs could be beaten, imprisoned, or even executed for disobedience. Peasants had little access to a fair trial, and the law was often skewed in favour of the landowner. Even if a peasant did have a complaint against a lord, they had no legal avenue through which to seek justice. Marriage and personal relationships were also dictated by the feudal system. Peasants were often required to seek permission from their lord to marry. This system reinforced their lack of autonomy. In some areas, marriages were subject to payment, meaning that peasants had to pay a fee to marry, which was a further burden on already limited resources. Another source of social oppression was the lack of mobility. Most peasants were tied to the land they worked and could not leave without permission. Even if a peasant wanted to seek a better life elsewhere, the feudal system prevented it. Serfs had little freedom to move, which kept them trapped in poverty, dependent on the land and their lord for survival. Conclusion. The hardships of medieval peasantry were manifold, ranging from relentless physical labour and the burden of taxes to the oppressive power of the church and the lords. In times of famine or disease, peasants faced starvation and death, with little protection from the whims of those in power. The social structure of feudalism was designed to keep peasants in their place, both economically and socially. Without access to education, legal recourse, or economic opportunity, peasants lived under an unrelenting cycle of hardship. Though many peasants resisted through rebellion or escape, most were trapped by the systems that sought to keep them in servitude. Their lives were marked by struggle, and their survival depended on their ability to endure, adapt, and keep working the land, even when the odds were stacked against them. And while this may seem like a hopeless situation, where there are oppression, there always rise heroes who challenge the system. They may not always be successful in achieving their immediate in the short term, but their bravery always paves the way for many a future generation. Let's take a look at a couple of such heroes. Wat Tyler and the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. The year was 1381, and England was at a boiling point. The socio-political climate was tense and filled with unrest, and it was in this tumultuous period that Wat Tyler, a seemingly ordinary man from Kent, would rise to lead the Peasants' Revolt, one of the most significant uprisings in English history. Tyler's revolt was a cry for justice that aimed to challenge the oppressive systems of taxation, land tenure and servitude that had long plagued the lower classes of medieval England. To understand the reasons behind the revolt, it is essential to grasp the harsh conditions that peasants lived under in the 14th century England. Following the Black Death in 1348, which wiped out a third of the population, England underwent a massive demographic change. The resulting labour shortage gave peasants newfound leverage, as their labour became highly valued. As a consequence, wages started to rise, and peasants had the ability to negotiate for better working conditions. However, this newfound power was short-lived. In response to the increasing independence of the peasantry, King Edward III and his successors enacted laws that sought to reassert feudal control over the population. The Statute of Labourers in 1351 fixed wages to pre-plague levels and attempted to curb workers' mobility. For the peasantry, this meant that any hope of rising out of poverty was dashed by legislation designed to keep them in place. By the time of the reign of Richard II, the peasantry was burdened by a mixture of oppressive laws, taxes, and economic hardship. The most significant of these taxes was the poll tax, a flat tax that required all adults, including the poor, to pay a specific amount regardless of their income or ability to pay. The tax, levied in 1377, 1379, and most notably in 1380, ignited widespread discontent. The taxes became a symbol of the deep-rooted inequality between the aristocracy and the common people. The tipping point for the peasants came in 1380, when the monarchy implemented a poll tax that placed a financial burden on every adult, including the poor. The poll tax required peasants to pay a flat rate of 4 pence per person, which may seem modest by today's standards, but for a labourer, this was an astronomical amount. In some regions, it was equivalent to a week's worth of wages for an unskilled worker. The new tax further exacerbated the already unbearable economic conditions for the common folk. It ignited anger and frustration and began to fuel the flames of rebellion. The government had intended the poll tax to help fund the ongoing 100 Years' War against France, but the peasants saw this as yet another exploitation by the monarchy and the ruling class. Tax collectors became the target of widespread resentment, and as more regions became involved in protests, it became clear that this was no longer just about the tax. It was about the entire oppressive system. Wat Tyler, a relatively unknown figure, would emerge as the leader of the peasants' uprising. His background remains somewhat obscure, with little concrete information about his early life. Most historians agree that he was likely a man of modest means, possibly a farmer or craftsman from the area of Kent, one of the most active regions in the revolt. His rise to prominence was largely due to the specific grievances he shared with his fellow peasants, primarily the poll tax and the oppressive policies of the nobility. As word spread throughout Kent and Essex that peasants were organising against the government, Tyler rose to lead a large group of rebels. His leadership was characterised by passionate speeches, the ability to rally the disillusioned, and a clear goal of seeking justice from a monarchy that had long ignored the needs of the common people. He and his supporters saw the revolt as a necessary and justified stand against the entrenched powers that had long exploited them. The peasants, under Tyler's leadership, began their march toward London. The revolt spread rapidly throughout southern England, and thousands of peasants from both Kent and Essex began organising and uniting for the common cause. In early June 1381, the first major battle between peasants and the royal forces took place. As the rebel army marched towards London, they began to attack homes of wealthy landowners, tax collectors, and anyone associated with the ruling elite. The march was a testament to the unity and defiance of the peasantry. As they moved forward, they rallied under the belief that they were fighting not just for better living conditions, but for the right to exist as free men in a system that had long denied them basic human dignity. The peasants were determined to show that they would no longer be crushed under the boot of the monarchy and nobility. The Peasants' March eventually led them to the gates of London. King Richard II, who was only 14 years old at the time, was forced to confront the rebel leaders. The city, which had long been a symbol of the power of the monarchy and aristocracy, was in danger of falling under the control of the peasants. On June 14th, 1381, Tyler and his rebels arrived at the gates of London, demanding a meeting with the king. Tyler and other rebel leaders, such as John Ball, a priest and fellow revolutionary, presented their demands: the abolition of serfdom, a reduction in taxes, and the redistribution of land. The young king and his advisors, feeling pressure, arranged to meet with the peasants in an effort to negotiate and defuse the crisis. On June 15th, Tyler and his forces from Kent confronted King Richard at Smithfield, just outside of London. During this encounter, Tyler personally addressed the king, presenting the demands of the rebels. Initially, the meeting appeared to be cordial, with Tyler engaging with the king in a friendly, albeit somewhat overly informal manner. Richard seemed receptive to the discussions, agreeing that the rebels would receive all that he could fairly grant. However, the meeting between Wat Tyler and the king would end in tragedy. As Wat Tyler's bold stand against the monarchy reached its peak, tensions ran high. The rebel leader, now standing before the king at Smithfield, made a final attempt to maintain his dignity in the face of his adversaries. According to a contemporary chronicler, Tyler, drenched in the heat of the day, acted with a certain contempt as he called for a flagon of water to rinse his mouth, unable to bear the dryness caused by the intense heat. When the water arrived, Tyler rinsed his mouth in a manner described as rude and disgusting, performing the act before the king's face in a gesture that many found highly insolent, especially considering the delicate atmosphere of the meeting. It was a small but significant act that highlighted the deep anger and defiance that had fueled the rebellion. Things escalated quickly when Sir John Newton, one of the king's servants, insulted Tyler, calling him the greatest thief and robber in all of Kent. This was the spark that ignited the fury in Tyler's heart. Furious and humiliated, he attacked Newton, throwing himself at the man with the intent of causing harm. But before he could land a blow, he was restrained by the Lord Mayor of London, William Walworth, who stepped in to protect Newton. In a fit of rage, Tyler attempted to stab Walworth, his knife aimed directly at the mayor, but Walworth, wearing armour, was spared from Tyler's assault. As the violence continued to unfold, Walworth, driven by self-preservation and his duty to the king, slashed Tyler across the neck and head with his sword. A servant of the king, possibly Ralph de Standish, further contributed to the attack, delivering a fatal blow. Tyler, still managing to stay on his horse despite the brutal injuries, rode a short distance, about 30 yards, before finally succumbing to his wounds and falling from his horse. The scene quickly descended into chaos, and Tyler was carried away, though not to safety. He was taken to a hospital for the poor, hoping for some relief from his injuries. But in the midst of the disorder, Walworth tracked Tyler down, determined to bring an end to the rebellious leader's life. Tyler was dragged back to Smithfield, where the Lord Mayor passed judgment and ordered that Tyler be publicly executed. His head was severed and displayed on a pole, a grisly sight meant to serve as a stark warning to any others who might dare challenge the authority of the crown. After Wat Tyler's death, the revolt quickly lost momentum. The peasants, leaderless and disorganized, were no match for the well-trained forces of the monarchy. Within days, the rebellion was crushed, and many of the leaders were captured and executed. King Richard II, once sympathetic to their cause, reneged on his promises and used the violence to justify further repression. Despite the failure of the revolt, the Peasants' Revolt of 1381 left a lasting mark on English society. The violence and unrest highlighted the deep fissures between the peasantry and the nobility. While the immediate demands of the peasants were not met, the revolt catalysed long-term changes in the English social system. The uprising ultimately contributed to the slow decline of serfdom in England and set the stage for future movements advocating for social reform. Though Wat Tyler's revolt was short-lived, his legacy has endured as a symbol of resistance against oppression. Tyler and his fellow peasants showed that even the most downtrodden of society could rise up and challenge the power of the monarchy and the aristocracy. Tyler's leadership in the face of overwhelming odds made him a hero to many, and his efforts continue to inspire movements for justice and equality. Even though the revolt itself was crushed, Wat Tyler's courage and determination to fight for his people's rights left a permanent mark on English history. His life is a testament to the resilience of the oppressed and a reminder of the power of collective action in the face of tyranny. Wat Tyler's Peasants' Revolt was one of the most significant uprisings in English history. Though the rebellion failed to achieve its immediate goals, it shed light on the oppressive system that governed medieval England and the deep divisions between the ruling elite and the common people. what Tyler's courage, determination and leadership have immortalized him as a symbol of resistance. His actions and the peasants' revolt paved the way for future challenges to the existing feudal order and laid the groundwork for a more equitable society in England. Tyler's life, though tragically cut short, serves as a reminder of the resilience of the oppressed and the importance of standing up against systems of injustice. His legacy, albeit brief, continues to inspire generations of those who seek to challenge the structures of power and demand justice for the marginalized. Thomas Müntzer, the revolutionary preacher and peasant leader. Thomas Müntzer, a name etched in the annals of history as one of the most radical leaders of the German Peasants' War, was a fiery revolutionary who challenged not only the oppressive feudal system, but also the very foundations of the early Protestant Reformation. His rebellion, though ultimately crushed, left an indelible mark on the struggles for social justice in Europe, inspiring later movements of the oppressed and painting him as an emblem of resistance against tyranny. Müntzer's life was characterized by his uncompromising vision of spiritual, social and political transformation. A man of intense faith and a preacher of the gospel, he was also an ardent advocate for the downtrodden, those who had long been silenced under the feudal system, the church and the nobility. He stood out from other religious reformers of his time, such as Martin Luther, who called for spiritual reform but maintained the existing political order. Müntzer, on the other hand, believed that true Christianity required a radical restructuring of both church and society. Born in 1489 in the small town of Stolberg, part of the Holy Roman Empire, modern-day Germany, Müntzer came from a relatively humble background. His father was a blacksmith, and he was raised in a small village where he likely experienced firsthand the social and economic struggles of the common people. As a youth, Müntzer was educated at the University of Leipzig, where he studied theology. This was where his radical ideas began to form, influenced by the early writings of Martin Luther. However, unlike Luther, who sought to reform the church from within, Müntzer became convinced that radical change was needed, not only in the church but in the entire social structure of Europe. At the university, Müntzer was exposed to the ideas of humanism and the emerging reformist movements. Like Luther, he was critical of the Catholic Church, particularly its sale of indulgences, its moral decay, and its oppressive relationship with the poor. But unlike Luther, Müntzer began to see that religious reforms would be futile unless they were paired with social and political changes. His later works reflect his deepening sense of injustice over the exploitation of the poor and the absolute power wielded by the monarchy, the nobility and the church. Müntzer first came into the public eye in 1519 when he began preaching in the town of Zwickau. It was during this time that he fully embraced the core principles of the Reformation, especially the idea of sola scriptura, scripture alone, and the rejection of the papal authority. However, Müntzer's interpretation of the Reformation was far more radical than Luther's. Luther advocated for reform within the structure of the Church, aiming to return to a more scriptural-based Christianity, but without questioning the existing societal order. Müntzer, however, believed that the Bible's teachings demanded a complete overthrow of the social, political and religious structures that oppressed the common people. Müntzer's approach to the Reformation also incorporated elements of mysticism. He believed that the true message of the Bible was revealed directly to the believer through the Holy Spirit, bypassing the corrupt clergy. His ideas began to attract a following of peasants, craftsmen and workers, particularly in the region of Thuringia. where he took up a preaching post in the town of Olstedt. His fiery sermons condemned not only the church and its officials, but also the aristocracy, whom he saw as the agents of Satan, oppressing the poor and holding power unjustly. While Luther's calls for reform were restrained, Muntzer began to advocate for a much more revolutionary approach, declaring that the kingdom of God would only be realised through violent means, by overthrowing the ruling class and purging society of the evils that it was built upon. He began to write pamphlets and sermons urging the peasants to rise up, with a view to not only spiritual salvation but also political and social justice. By 1524, the social tensions in Germany, particularly in the rural areas, had reached a boiling point. The peasants, suffering under the crushing weight of feudal dues, high taxes and oppressive landowners, began to rebel. The conditions of the peasantry were brutal. Exploitation was rampant, with peasants subjected to harsh labour in fields owned by local lords and suffering under the whims of the clergy and the aristocracy. The Peasants' War, which erupted in 1524, was initially a response to the unbearable economic hardships the peasants faced. They demanded lower rents, fewer obligations to their feudal lords, and a reduction in the excessive tolls and taxes they were required to pay. This revolt, however, quickly escalated into a much broader movement, as radical leaders like Thomas Muntzer began to reshape the rebellion into a religious and political revolution. Muntzer's role in the uprising was pivotal. He preached to the peasants that the revolt was not only a fight for economic justice, but also a holy war, a battle between the righteous and the corrupt. Muntzer's fiery rhetoric and passionate speeches convinced many of the peasants that they were divinely chosen to overthrow the forces of evil embodied by the feudal lords and the church. His belief in a direct, violent confrontation with the established authorities led him to march with the peasant army, which swelled in numbers as it moved across central Germany. Muntzer's forces, despite their religious fervour and numbers, were poorly equipped and lacked the military discipline needed to face off against the well-trained forces of the nobility. However, they were driven by an ideology that viewed their fight as a divine mission. Muntzer's followers believed that God was on their side and their battle was one of divine justice. The final confrontation of the Peasants' War took place in May 1525 at the Battle of Frankenhausen. Muntzer's army, having captured several towns and villages, faced off against a well-armed and highly trained force led by Prince George of Saxony. The peasants, poorly organised and lacking the experience of professional soldiers, were no match for the forces arrayed against them. The battle was over within hours, and Muntzer's army was utterly defeated. Muntzer himself was captured and brought before the victorious forces. Despite being offered clemency if he recanted his beliefs, Muntzer remained defiant. His refusal to back down from his revolutionary ideals led to his swift execution. On May 27th, 1525, Muntzer was executed by beheading in the town of Mühlhausen, along with several of his followers. His death marked the end of the Peasants' War, and the crushing of the rebellion that had seemed so full of promise just months earlier. Thomas Muntzer's legacy is complex. To some, he remains a hero, a martyr for the cause of social justice, religious freedom, and the rights of the oppressed. His radical vision of a Christian society that sought both spiritual and social renewal resonated with later revolutionary movements, particularly those that sought to challenge the authority of the church and the state. His commitment to social justice and his willingness to fight for the poor and the oppressed have inspired countless movements for change throughout history. Muntzer's ideas, although not fully realised in his time, have continued to influence social and religious movements in Germany and beyond. His rejection of established authority and his call for a radical transformation of society found echoes in later revolutionary thinkers, including those in the Marxist and socialist traditions. Muntzer remains a figure who embodies the struggle for equality, freedom, and justice, and though his life ended in failure, his spirit of defiance lives on in the ongoing struggles of the oppressed. Thomas Muntzer's life was one of intense faith, radical ideology, and revolutionary fervour. He sought not just religious reform, but an entire societal transformation. Though his rebellion was crushed, and he was executed for his beliefs, his legacy continues to inspire movements for social and political justice. His passionate commitment to a new world order, where the oppressed could find freedom and dignity, stands as a testament to the enduring power of revolutionary thought in the face of overwhelming oppression. As we draw to the end of our exploration into the life of a medieval peasant, we're reminded of the extraordinary resilience of those who lived through some of the harshest conditions known to history. From the grueling days spent in the fields under a merciless sun, to the ingenious ways they adapted to the oppressive summer heat, medieval peasants developed strategies that were both resourceful and at times bizarre. Whether it was the unyielding layers of wool and linen, the struggle for shade, or the quirky use of animals and herbal remedies, these people fought every day against nature's wrath with an undying spirit. We've also uncovered the darker side of their existence, the constant oppression from feudal landlords, the heavy hand of the church, and the merciless taxation that stripped them of any hope for a life of comfort. Yet, despite these immense hardships, there were those who rose against the system, like Wat Tyler and Thomas Muntzer, leaders who ignited the flames of rebellion and fought for justice, heroes whose courage echoes through history. In contrast to modern life, where comforts and conveniences are often taken for granted, the medieval peasant's story serves as a reminder of how far we've come, and how easily we forget the price of progress. Their sacrifices, struggles, and victories paved the way for the freedoms we now enjoy, and in their stories we find not just hardship, but an unwavering determination to survive and create change.